Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar, 4 Elements of a Powerful Data-Driven Martech Stack, presented by Zeta Global and Martech. Before we begin, if you have any audio issues, click the audio icon on your screen to enable your audio settings. If you have any viewing issues, you can use the Q&A section to communicate with us at any time. You can also send questions directly to the speakers about their presentation using the Q&A. Now, let's get to the presentation. Joining us and moderating today's panel is Matt Mobley, President of CRM at Zeta Global. Thanks, Matt, for joining us, and I will turn things over to you.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Just a little bit about Zeta, if you don't know who Zeta is. Zeta is a leading sort of data-driven, cloud-based marketing technology company that really empowers enterprises to acquire, grow, and sort of retain those customers. The ZMP, or the Zeta Marketing Platform, is one of the largest sort of omni-channel marketing platforms with identity at its core, with these capabilities to analyze, structured data, unstructured data, data points, ultimately at the end of the day to connect with the consumer. Which sort of brings us a little bit to what sort of today is about as we sort of think about this. As we know, sort of the market today, the marketer today, is somewhat awash in data, and you're ultimately trying to connect, to a single sort of individual and be able to create a moment with them, to have an experience with them that you can connect in order ultimately to drive, as we think about sort of brand loyalty and sort of engagement with those individuals. So today we're going to talk about it, not only in the context of, the moment on sort of the art of delivering that sort of capability, but also how we look at sort of the technology around sort of this, this context that's out there, both from the data side and from, sort of the technology components that sit in there and start to consume that data to deliver that actual moment. We have 3 other panelists with me, so we'll do, a quick introduction, allow them to do sort of a quick introduction so you know who we're talking with. And we'll start actually with Jessica from Forrester.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. I'm Jessica Liu. I am a senior analyst at Forrester on the B2C marketing team. I cover strategy and technologies, have sort of been on a journey at Forrester covering everything from social media to marketing operations to personalization to a little bit of mobile marketing. And again, the strategies and technologies that lead companies to those end results.
Very good. Thanks, Jesse. And then we have Brian.
Yep, I'm Brian Stavis. I lead our advertising and marketing technology category on AWS Marketplace. I've spent the past 10 years working with ad tech and marketing technology solutions and predominantly in the business development partnership space. Looking forward to today's session.
Very good. And David.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to participate in the panel. My name is David Wells. I lead the media and advertising vertical on Snowflake's marketplace. So my remit is to surface best-in-class providers and services specific to media and advertising on Snowflake.
Very good, thanks. And they have me once again, Matt Mobley from Zeta. That's in there. So let's just jump in. Actually, let's start at sort of the business context side of it. I think this is really sort of discussing, a little bit like, Jesse, what have you been seeing as you think about sort of consumer behavior over the past 5 years, and how, not only what that behavior is, but how marketers need to think about it as they think about sort of their capabilities to enable their ability to connect with those consumers.
Yeah, a big one. So I think hopefully it's not argumentative to say that consumer experiences have transformed at a crazy, unprecedented pace. And even prior to the pandemic, this was already happening. And a lot of that is being really driven by consumers that are empowered and they're super connected today. And those words, empowered and connected, we think of them as that description we think of as having 5 facets. We define those empowered and connected consumers as, first, they're willing to experiment, especially younger cohorts. 2, self-efficacy. They are really about optimizing their own experiences. 3, information savviness. They know where to find the relevant information they need, and they're quick to share it once they get it. 4 is this sort of digital physical integration. A great example might be like the whole buy online, pick up in store experience. And then 5th is the device usage, which we all are dominated by devices nowadays, and our reliance on devices, particularly mobile devices, is only increasing year over year. So this concept of I guess empowered and connected consumers is really driving entirely new business models and new ways of consuming products, which also changes the way that companies think about products and consumers think about products. Companies have to really consider how to market these products nowadays, because a consumer or customer experience doesn't just stop when you advertise, market, and complete the sales transaction. Okay, I'm done. That's not true anymore. That's just the beginning nowadays. So today's companies really have to wrap their heads around needing to do planning. They need planning, they need data, they need technology that addresses the needs of that full consumer or customer experience that moves well beyond just selling the product, which may have been the focus in years past or in decades past.
Right. Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it's interesting the 5 sort of aspects that you sort of bring out. I mean, so many times we just think about it in this a very simple complex of the digital consumer, but the reality is there's a lot of complexity as we think about that sort of consumer, and I think it's a good framework to think about, what that actual piece is and how actually what I would argue the digital consumer today is even very different than the 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago.
For sure.
Consumer that's out there. So that's always good. Brian, when you look at it from your all side of the house, sort of on that sort of the marketplace side of AWS and things like that, you're seeing how companies are pursuing sort of technologies and investigating technologies that are out there that are really enabling them to sort of look at, really the problem statement that sort of Jesse sort of put out there, this sort of notion that's out there. How are you seeing sort of them sort of explore and engage in a marketplace? What are they looking for and things like that when you think about your side over there?
Well, I think I'm just gonna say ditto to anything Jesse says, because she's gonna sound a lot more eloquent and smarter than I will. But I think what's fun about the space that we're all collectively working in is the growing attention and demand and like the customer use cases and challenges that we're all trying to solve in this space. Like one stat that I always point to with respects to the customer experience was published by, I think it's the International Data Corporation, the IDC, and they predicted that 65% of global GDP will actually flow through digital channels by the end of this year. And that's going to drive, it's like almost $7 trillion of direct digital experience investments through the end of next year. So to me, that's the most exciting part, is like, there's obviously a growing demand, growing investment. And some of the major trends that we're seeing time and time again on the AWS marketplace is customers are asking us, like, how do they optimize that digital customer experience, but mainly in the ways that they can improve their analytics and insights, like how they can accelerate their own data sharing and interoperability. And then, how they can fine tune all that data and how they activate that data through campaign management and orchestration and attribution. And ultimately, how are they engaging with those users at that very moment of intent, right? And that's what's exciting to me, is like there's all these growing use cases, but at the end of the day, what it comes back to is like, how are you going to maintain that customer trust as you continue to see advancements in the ways that we're interacting with users, and then the time that customers are spending on these digital environments, as Jesse alluded to. Marketing and attribution will need to evolve in order to ensure and balance customer privacy while obviously improving that customer loyalty at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think it's also, I think it's, especially just to key off of the word sort of interoperability as you think in there, and this is a little bit of a tangential question, but relative to it, as you think about it, like when you look at the newer technologies that are coming in that are servicing this space, or the technologies that are people are sort of acquiring and leveraging, I guess you could say in there, do you see the move from the point solution to more of the sort of aggregate, more holistic platforms, or do you still see a mix in there? Like, what's your take on actually what's happening in there?
For sure. I think customers are demanding that, like, even, you're not just collecting data, you're activating that data, you're enriching that data, you're adding more value than just, a one, I mean, you want to have a more holistic approach, because what we're seeing, right, there's over 9,000 ad tech, Martech solutions in the space. And so to pick and choose which one is going to solve your customer need, like, why have, over 50 solutions in your tech stack? So customers are asking for the integration and interoperability of third-party solutions that are more important than just price or ease of use, or even the features that are provided by an individual point solution. Because historically, data silos have led to inefficiencies and redundancies of these individual point solutions. So I think we are starting to, or not even starting, we've been seeing this shift to a more holistic platform approach that can solve a variety of customer needs and not just an individual customer challenge.
Right, right. Well, and it also tackles some of the issues with, the hidden tax of integration, right? As people go on these sort of platforms.
100%.
And I think, I mean, it actually, David, it actually brings up, if you think about the hidden tax of integration, usually it sort of manifests itself at the data layer, right? If you think about it, like there is, how do I move the data between the systems in order to create commonality of an understanding, or even a commonality of the understanding of the experience that the consumer have. I know with the work that you guys have with the technologies and things like that, how are you tell us a little bit how you're seeing marketers sort of engage with data in new ways, and how they're leveraging this more common sort of data pool in order to get focused on, that common experience across these multitude of devices, as Jesse was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, I think to simplify it, it's really the frequency with which the data is updated, the granularity of the data, and then the pure volume, right? So I use a really sort of pedestrian example, is that David Wells in January is not the same David Wells in June. In January, I live in Princeton, New Jersey with my wife and daughter. It's cold outside. I'm inside. I'm working. And in June, I'm out in Teton Valley, Idaho, where we're spending time outside. We're fly fishing, we're horseback riding, we're taking hikes. Now that seems very pedestrian, but like the true can be said of David on Monday versus David on Saturday, or David at 9 a.m. versus David at 3 p.m. So the question becomes, how do you leverage these great swath of different data sets that are available for media and advertising applications? And how do you parse that and get that with great frequency so that you have that moment that is most relevant, and you have that really wonderful experience with your individual consumer? And I think that's really where the most sophisticated marketers are headed, is that they're putting the customer at the center there. And it's not really about moving product. It's about maintaining that relationship and, doing right by customers, or doing right with their customers, I should say.
Yeah. I prefer pedestrian sort of answers. It's easier for me to understand. Number two, it doesn't sound like a very pedestrian life, though. In all honesty, that's I'd like to sign up for part of that. But back to it. I digress. And I think it's interesting. The word you sort of key off there is the moment, right? The sort of point of engagement in there. And I know, Jesse, some of the work that you've done, especially writing about the sort of notion of, this moments-based marketing sort of concept that's in there. Why don't you talk a little bit about it? Like what marketers need to do to capture the moment, to win the sale, to build that sort of loyalty, but really the importance of the moment relative to those type of things.
Yeah, I loved what David just described as, in our minds, it's been an evolution, right? Companies went from going from one to many. Like, think about the days of the 60s when it was just about mass reach. And then we kind of tried to shift towards one-to-one, like a very individualized approach. And how much information can we know about one person? And how do we leverage that information and deliver to Jesse? specifically. But now I feel like we're in a place where it's actually about one to moment. So if we've gone from one to many, then one to one, now it's actually more important to go one to moment. It's almost, I don't want to say unimportant, but it's less important the individual person and more important that you're delivering on that person's need at that moment. And we've actually defined a moment in our Forrester research, of course, because that's what we do. We have acronyms and definitions for everything. But a moment we think of as a point in time and space when a person interacts with a brand to get what they want immediately and in context. And that moment is more critical than the individual person in some ways, because as David pointed out, David could be different on Saturday versus on Monday. David could be different in the winter versus the summer. And so the moment is the key piece of how brands should communicate with consumers. And if you want to break down a moment, we sort of think about it as there's context first, right? Like that's at the heart of these moments, and all the interactions have to share this kind of one source of truth for the context. But then around the context, you have to know who it is. Is it David? What the content I want to deliver to David is it summer or is it winter? Then I need to know the channel. Where do I deliver it, in Idaho or in, sorry, I forgot where you live, in New Jersey?
Yeah.
And then when to trigger it. So like, sure, is it winter or summer again? So going back to that. So like the context might be at the middle, the who, the consumer, the what, the content, the where, the channel, and then the trigger, the when, all comprise the moment that you as a brand or a company deliver ultimately to the consumer. And what's sort of challenging though about a moment and trying to wrap your head around it first is that they happen across the entire customer life cycle, right? Like they are advertising moments to influencing moments pre-purchase to a sales moment when you make the purchase to product moments after you've unboxed the product or started the service. There are customer service moments when you're running into challenges with XYZ, and loyalty moments when you've decided to really sign on and become an ambassador to the brand. And all of those individual moments kind of sum up to this bigger customer experience, which of course makes things incredibly hard for companies, right? Like this is trying to set a new standard for customer engagement within companies. And that really means that to deliver a moment and multiple moments within a customer experience really increases the back-end operational scope and the sphere for these companies. And that includes, technology, that includes planning, that includes orchestration, that includes departments that historically have not wanted to work together, having to work together. So there's a lot of operational scope and sphere that really increases exponentially when trying to deliver these moments.
Right. Just a follow up to it a little bit. When you look at like when you think about the sort of technology market to deliver those sort of moments, as a grade, without sort of, how do you see it? And then one is not only what the market is how ready are the marketers to sort of consume that technology to deliver those moments too. Sort of, you could grade both of those things, or at least give us your perspective on it.
I won't grade because I feel like I'll be unkind, but I will describe our perspective on it. So when we think about, the technology to deliver this kind of moments based experience, we always ground things in our model for modern marketing, which talks about 3 key pillars. There's customer understanding. So as a company, you need to understand the customer, the context, who it is, what's motivating them. That should inform your brand strategy, which should then drive your brand experience. And we think about next-gen Martech capabilities as really supporting those 3 phases. So for example, like a Martech reference model might contain layers of technology in the customer understanding piece. You might need customer analytics and customer data management, right? And then for the brand strategy pillar, you would need layers of marketing resource management as well as marketing performance management to help inform your strategy and drive the strategy. And then for the brand experience pillar, you would need elements of marketing automation and experience delivery to finally deliver the thing you want to deliver to your customers. And there's this sort of fourth bonus layer, if you will, which is underlying those three pillars, and that's the data fabric. And when we talk about the data fabric, like functionally, we mean the ability to sort of supply very precise and complete and scaled data to all of the other Martech applications for insights and engagement. So this might include collecting information and data from internal, external sources. It means managing that data for quality and efficiency and assembling whatever customer profile you're able to assemble. And so any tech that has to, or that is trying to fulfill this data fabric needs to provide sort of access to that customer and business data and transform it into something actionable that marketers can use. I'd argue, though, unfortunately, but we're getting better, I'd argue that marketers and Martech itself has been very historically focused on the brand experience pillar, that last part, which is the execution, deliver the final thing to the end customer. But in recent years, the market has really accelerated for that customer understanding pillar, that first one, as well as the data fabric piece. And this has particularly been true as the industry has undergone such rapid change with things like data deprecation and the move towards zero and first party data and holding that data in-house. So there's been a noticeable shift towards that customer understanding and the data fabric piece, which marketers have just been, I don't want to say slow, but have been, trying to wrap their heads around in recent years. How do we incorporate this whole element that we didn't really have to think about before because somebody else did it?
Right. Yeah. I think there's an interesting sort of parallel to it too. Also, just something that we've seen from our side, which is this change in sort of the culture of marketing technology. And I'll tell you what I mean specifically on it is the 6-7 years ago, a lot of times the marketer was buying technology to sort of move it away from their IT department because their IT department didn't have as much of a grasp of where Martech sat, even though they were the holders of data, right? And they knew how data, and they ultimately hold their consumer data at some point. And maybe it was 10 years ago, but there's been a natural sort of evolution of that. What is those technology departments more and greater understanding of sort of marketing technology as a whole. I think culturally, you're starting to see those two pieces start to come together. What was the traditional IT department within a business and the marketing department coming in there. So now their ability to handle that larger portion of data to define the customer, understand the event, understand all of those things, and ultimately deliver. It's not just you're seeing that move into a wider sort of concept that's in there. So we see some of that sort of culture changing on it. It's a big. I think it's interesting. I mean, just to go back, technologies like, if I just sort of go to Snowflake here, technologies like Snowflake allow us to allow, things that were built by marketing SIs to now be part of the enterprise data architecture through data sharing and all those types of things, increase all this accessibility to it. I mean, David, if you even want to talk about it, accessibility and usability is sort of the importance of this stuff, and not only just general accessibility and usability of that data, but it's also about the real-time sort of accessibility in order to get to where sort of Jesse's talking about. So if you have some thoughts on,
absolutely. And I have to say, I love Jesse's one-to moment. I had not heard that, so I'm going to shamelessly repurpose that as my own. Thank you. I appreciate that. Absolutely, like data sharing and sort of the recency or frequency with which that data is made available and to whom, that's hugely important. One of Snowflake's many points of differentiation is this idea of data sharing, and it's a shared data architecture, so you can share data sets without movement of data within your own org or with partners, irrespective of cloud or region. And so while we thought of data and data marketplaces once upon a time as having static data sets, right? Like maybe there's a file of offline demographic, information, which includes like my age and marital status, which is valuable, by the way, but it changes, once a year, or marital status, hopefully never. It's also, there's more and more like data that's getting updated with greater regularity. And one of the things about Snowflake that we really love is that as often as the data provider is updating that data and shares it with the recipient who's gleaning the value of it, that gets reflected in that share. So we're seeing more and more partners, instead of uploading files that live in tables that have sort of static data sets, they're streaming data that talks about David, in January versus June, or David on Monday versus Saturday, or, 9 a.m. versus 3 p.m. And they're using that to personalize that moment, to use Jesse's parlance. And I think there's a lot of value in that. The more sophisticated marketers are identifying those partners that have greater updates of data that they can parse really quickly, and then use that to personalize the experience. And mind you that we have to do all of this while still maintaining privacy compliance. Like at the top of the panel, you started talking about identity and how crucial that is. Your data is totally dependent upon your identity solution and your ability to understand that individual, that household, and do it while maintaining the privacy of that individual. So that's a really key component as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we look at it, it's the two, privacy, compliance, the data itself obviously are so intertwined, and we have to, the capabilities that we have to have in order to go do that, become sort of critical. Well, it's table stakes, right? You have to, or you got a bigger issue right on your hands, especially as you look at sort of global capabilities that are out there, and even sort of the changing sort of privacy law here within the States as we look at it. So. Brian, just to go back up to sort of even on the sort of the AWS side of the house, as you're looking at, because you have the opportunity to engage with customers who are using the marketplace to look at new technologies that are in there. Are you seeing, so as they look at it just beyond just sort of ingest and sort of management, measurement of data, all of this stuff, like what are you seeing and hearing from the customers that you have a chance to sort of engage with in the marketplace from the AWS side? And obviously, to the moment.
Yeah, and specifically and I'm stealing Jesse's comments there on moments as well. I will give you credit. But I think what's interesting is as you look at every single industry, the moment chain is very different. For travel, when you get to, if you're booking on the app versus on the website, as you get to the kiosk, as you get into the airplane, as you get into the hotel, each one of those moments requires a different level of data collection, but also engagement. The same thing goes for retail or manufacturing or healthcare, life sciences, media and entertainment. Like there's all these different moments, and so as you're looking at that moment of intent for each one of those industries, there's a different solution to solve for each one of those use cases. And so that's what I think is so interesting, for David and myself working with marketplaces, because we get the opportunity to work with all of these third-party solutions that can help you optimize that, a moment or customer journey, right? There's solutions that now can help you. Like back in the day, you would have to guess of where should you put the subscribe button or the buy now button, or how should you place the certain things within an app or on a website or even in the store? You would have to wait weeks or months to figure out, are we doing it the right way? Nowadays, there's solutions that can do real-time A/B testing and give you and allow you to optimize that user journey in real time. There's all these, machine learning or AI algorithms that are facilitating in some of that automation. And so I think that's what's really interesting as we're talking about these moments is like you're able to maximize conversion rates while also managing that balance of user trust and data privacy, as David was just alluding to.
I think that's really well said. I mean, the moment, like Brian, you said something that, got my wheels turning, which is like knowing the difference between a moment, like one varies so greatly according to industry, right? And then where you are and what your relationship is. Like I think about a retailer and a moment of, do I want them to actually like push me a product that I potentially am, ripe to purchase? Or do I want them just to push a piece of content to me so I can have an affiliation with that brand with something that I like? I think that's very well said. Yeah.
Well, and I do think that there's two sides to the coin of personalization. Obviously personalization can reduce like acquisition costs and mitigate customer churn, right? But then there's the data privacy. It's the less fun side, but it's obviously data integrity and privacy are just as critical. And so maintaining that balance, I think, is, it's necessary as we're going into some of the third-party cookie deprecation and obviously some of the changing regulations, as Matt was just referencing.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's as we think about it, like when we think about the technologies at the cornerstone of, for this Martech stuff, and I'll put this out to Jesse and what else to sort of chime in. Some of the being able to deliver the moment. What do you see as sort of those core capabilities in that stack? Is it like the CDP? Is it really I know you said the execution is part of it, but is the management of data?
Yeah.
Where do you see the places the marketers really need to focus to really be able to start to capitalize on that moment in there?
Yeah, if I go back to what I was saying earlier, how we think of the sort of 3 pillars of model for modern marketing and how the technology naturally falls within those 3 pillars, you have the customer understanding, the brand strategy, and then the brand experience, and then that data fabric underlying all of it is foundational. I think the customer understanding and the data fabric are increasingly important to deliver a moment. And when I say increasingly important, I mean not only are they present, but accessible to marketers so that they can then deliver whatever they need to deliver in that moment. It's interesting because as Brian was talking through testing and optimization and better understanding, using the feedback loop to better understand the end customer, what they need, and then feeding that back into the strategy. That is a great example of how the customer understanding pillar has really evolved in recent years, past decade, let's just call it, with increased understanding of customers through testing and then the ability for companies to then optimize. That is something that, decades ago was harder to accomplish, and now today is really ramped up. So going back to those 3 pillars, if you think about, again, in customer understanding, what does that mean? That means customer analytics and customer data management and brand strategy. That means marketing resource management as well as marketing performance management to formulate the strategy. And then in the brand experience side, the marketing automation and experience delivery, which everyone knows all too well. I would say the customer understanding aspect is so important nowadays. And really, you cannot deliver a moment without that critical piece. It's
right.
The linchpin.
Yeah, I'll tell you, just so everyone who's having the opportunity to see the panel, you can enter questions into the Q&A section that's in there. So as they're coming up, and I'm actually, there's a question that comes directly off of sort of what we were talking about. I was in there about data fabric, and it's it's an interesting question because I think it's the data fabric. It's actually an old term if you look at it from the hardware days of how we thought about how we were linking storage to the larger sort of platforms. This is probably pre-cloud. We talk data fabrics and things like that, even post that's in there. But really, when we think of data fabric as the concept today, a lot of it deals with how we think about how we manage this sort of what are many times very widely disparate systems. That have a large amount of data that's spread out over this thing that we have to weave back together so that we can have a singular sheet, per se, if I could just stretch the analogy a little bit more here, a singular sheet of which we can now, sort of make decisions onto it. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges. But interestingly, one of the areas where I think some of the technology that's come out in recent history, i.e. like the snowflakes, have actually given us sort of an entree into really thinking about the practical implications or the practical implementations of these things within there. So, David, I don't know if you want to talk about, we don't go into data meshes and all that, but definitely, the notion of data fabric and how you guys are sort of looking at it from the flip side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nomenclature we use is the idea of a golden record, right? Mm-hmm. Single, a single view of an individual or a household that has, disparate data sets of all manner, and not just media and advertising data sets, surfaced under one profile. And that's, incredibly important to having that understanding or customer 360, and then having that moment and that interaction with that individual. And there are a variety of different data sets that I think we all know, are made available in marketplaces, things that we traditionally think of in past years that people have leveraged, like, transaction data, interaction data, online audience data, offline demo data. But more and more, what we're seeing is this idea of this shared data architecture and seamless sharing of data in a privacy compliant way is unlocking new partnerships that are not just third-party data necessarily, right? So they're more like second-party relationships, and partners that are on our platform on AWS, are sharing data and they're collaborating so that they together can actually have a better view of those individuals, where in past years, the technology wouldn't allow them to do it. And so that's super, super exciting. I mean, listen, I've lived in the third-party data world and I love third-party data. I think there's tremendous value, but thinking about two different marketers or two different players that play in an ecosystem that are able to collaborate and have a greater understanding of David or Jesse or Brian and drive a more meaningful interaction or moment, that's really where the future is headed, I think. And they will bolster that, with other third-party data sets, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, the third-party data world's, I mean, if you look at, if you go pre-CDP and we were all had our DMPs, you had this wide sort of set of third-party data that sort of crammed up in there. Every one of them marketplace. We've actually moved a little bit away from those third-party data sets a little bit. The CDPs don't naturally come with sort of, the wide variety of don't naturally come with a third-party marketplace. Zeta's introduced one into not necessarily a marketplace, but a third-party data asset that's in there. It becomes sort of critical to those things. We moved away, but I also think that's a function of the rise of privacy and compliance, the need of how we look at first-party data, the importance of then creating partnerships for that second party. I'm not going to say that it's going to third-party data will go away, but I definitely think it's it's the second sister to this notion of first and second party data.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe the way to say it is like third-party data as it relates just to a single first-party data set is valuable in and of itself. However, when you talk about multi-party joins and two different marketers sharing that first-party data together and overlaying third-party data to extrapolate some insights about commonalities of their customers, that's where like there's a whole new dynamic that's unlocked, and those third-party data providers are, they're adding value that maybe they hadn't added in the past, and that's really just an outcome of technology and where we're headed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brian, I mean, we were talking a little bit about data fabric, and I think there's a lot of sort of evolution here as we think about sort of the future of like Martech and sort of capabilities out there. I mean, is there anything particular you guys are seeing from the AWS side, and sort of what's this futuristic sort of Martech things that may be coming out, maybe in the data sharing space too, or compliance? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, David said it so profoundly, is because we continue to invest in these cross-vendor clean rooms and these data partnerships, where I've been very bullish on the space, because I do think these data partnerships can introduce a new era of personal data by building a more distributed platform that will accelerate data generation, facilitate data access, and streamline data analysis. And so I think that's one angle. Where you mentioned it as well, Matt, is like CDPs are the building block. They are table stakes for any well-oiled marketing technology stack. They were the hottest commodity a couple of years ago, and now I just think that they are the baseline of what every single marketing technology solution needs. And some of the key areas where we're seeing is like, the data collection and the deduping and enrichment across web app, in-store, social, CRM, video, and POS is like that's again, you need that in order to then power the next aspect, which is a little more nuanced, and that's like the data orchestration and activation and personalization of that data. So I think in the simplest way, which type of solutions can help your company make sense of the data in order to interact and engage with each individual at every step of the customer journey without being too invasive, right? And so those are the key areas that we continue to see time and time again. and where our customers are demanding the use cases as it pertains to data collaboration and interoperability.
Right. Right. Well, we'll get ready to kick into full Q&A here. There's been a couple more questions that are sort of come in on it. I don't know if anyone has any sort of closing topic, the main sort of topic before we go into full Q&A. If David or Jesse or Brian want to add a few more thoughts in there.
I feel like it's maybe a good place to end where you started. You asked Matt at the beginning about point solutions or broader, I guess, in effect, suite solutions. And I feel like, well, no secret to any of you guys, but Martech has grown beyond its traditional siloed categories. Today there's so much overlapping functionality that exists across these formerly discrete categories, and it's sometimes difficult to know where one tech ends and another begins, and trying to box them into categories is increasingly harder when there's so much duplication within the Martech ecosystem. But I think from the company's perspective, they really need to think about assembling an ecosystem and not a portfolio of applications. And Brian, David have talked about interoperability and integration. I've talked about integration. No single piece of Martech exists in isolation, right? And the Martech suite has to kind of work as a cohesive unit these days. So I feel like it just needs to be said that marketers really have to adopt this ecosystem-oriented mindset rather than a roster mindset that previously existed, still exists today in some cases. So yes, most companies today probably have some element of fragmentation in their Martech stack, some incomplete data access, living in different silos. They probably have inefficient workflows. They may have underutilized functionality. In fact, I know they have underutilized functionality across many of their Martech applications. So yes, there's this big undertaking in front of them to sort of design and deploy and manage this complete cohesive Martech ecosystem. And that's, I just want to acknowledge that is the existing challenge today, but it is a good challenge to have because it means we are trying to move away from, again, that roster of applications that exist with no connection to one another. And we are trying to shift towards an ecosystem that can work together to deliver those moments that we've been talking about for the past 40 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. I'll tell you I like the concept of sort of the portfolio versus the roster as we think about it. And arguably, the way I've always thought of it in my years, I've been in marketing technology now for like 23 years. So, I mean, back when we were just building junk mail databases and sending out credit card offers to, I remember way back actually as we look at it. But the interesting thing to it is we spend so much time selecting the technology that goes in the box and so little time about in between the boxes, right? And I think that's really what you're getting at, Jesse, is this notion that, in the portfolio, we have to make active decisions about what's between the boxes and how these things sort of come together. Is it part of the suite? What functions belong where? How we're going to sort of handle those things? Where are lines of demarcation and sort of this notion of how the data fabric's going to spread out underneath these sort of capabilities to it? And I think it's a material switch that that marketers need to really think about. I also think it's interesting. I was looking at the questions coming up. There's an org question that goes with this. If that's on there about the organizational effect. I think there's a lot of changes just sort of organizationally as we think about some of those. I talked a little bit early on about what I see is now the embracing of sort of IT. Right. And sort of the marketing before it was sort of standoffish a little bit, 10 years ago. But now there's a natural sort of embracing that's starting to occur. And I think more of it has to occur. I think they'll get more benefit out of it. Just going back to you a little bit, Jesse, when you think about the organizational side of this thing, how does, the moments, the tech and, sort of, the organizational implications to this thing?
Yeah. Staffing and skills, definitely a big, point of concern, if I'm being honest. And you nailed it on the head, Matt. Traditional IT and procurement, for that matter, have not understood Martech. It's like Martech's almost an afterthought, or they just didn't have dedicated resources to understanding Martech. But the good news is that I've seen over the past few years an increase in people who have that in their title, like enterprise architecture for Martech, or they work in the IT department and they've told me that, they are now dedicated to Martech, but they need us to educate them on what that means. And so there is an increased interest and assigning of responsibility to specific people within IT to focus on Martech, which is a good thing. But that's a small win and progress towards the end goal. But to your point, yes, historically, a lot of the staffing and skills have been missing. And that, I think, if we are truly going to achieve what I just described in the Martech ecosystem, where we are a true portfolio across the enterprise, there needs to be more cohesion and teamwork, playing nice in the sandbox with the rest of the enterprise, because so much is dependent on, the central data store, and that isn't always owned by marketing, or marketing didn't have access to it in some cases. So there definitely needs to be more playing nice in the sandbox moving forward.
Yeah. And there's a sort of a secondary part of this question that was sent in, was also it's sort of the data ownership piece of it, right? And fostering some of those things. And David, your perspective on this would be appreciated on how obviously different parts of the organization have ownership of the data, and even as we look at it, and how our technology sort of overcoming this sort of the inability to create a fabric because of data ownership silos within organizations.
It's a great question. And to Jesse's point, where some of those IT leaders are, sort of educating themselves or having a greater understanding of like ad tech, MarTech, I think similarly, some people who've lived on the marketing side of the house are getting more technology proficient, or they know SQL, or they might know other languages. What we've seen is, and so it's kind of like all things merge, like they're kind of going towards the center where they each sort of speak the same language and they have enough information that they're dangerous. And then they have their really core skill set where they're either super technical or they're super marketing oriented and with some technical chops. One of the things that we've seen, and it's a huge part of Snowflake's, I would say, future, is this idea of the development of native apps and applications that use data to provide a function or extrapolate value out of data, whether it's first or third party data that is, the use of that native app. It doesn't require any kind of technical acumen. And so we've seen more and more of our partners actually, instead of sharing data or requiring that you can share data and then run SQL queries or have knowledge of SQL, they're actually, our partners are developing native apps that are deployed in the instances of our Snowflake partners that actually provide that value with no SQL understanding. And we think that is possibly where the world is headed, and we're really bullish on that.
Yeah. It's interesting, even if we think about these, the wider marketplace. Obviously, Brian, you guys have you're also your marketplace as you look at. How are you seeing it as you're looking at sort of this what I'd say this sort of meshing of IT and marketing relative to the capabilities that you guys are seeing within that are presented now within the marketplace that you guys are at?
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to, we launched the advertising and marketing technology category on AWS Marketplace last year. And part of that is the marketing department is the largest line of business technology decision maker within a company, right? So we know marketers are investing. And one thing that we continue to say is it used to be the technology department would go down a rabbit hole and try to build a CDP or build a CRM solution or build whatever personalization tool. But now when you have the choice of 9,000 or 9,900 solutions in the market today, the ad tech, MarTech ecosystem today, why not take advantage of the billions of dollars in R&D that these other companies have been doing, and they have years or decades of experience of doing it? So your IT team can now focus on their core competencies as opposed to trying to build a marketing technology solution that's not in their sweet spot. And so I do think you're starting to see marketers have a seat at the table because, one, there's plenty of options for them to pick and choose best-in-class solutions to fit into their tech stack, and not pay that integration fee, as you had alluded to earlier, Matt. But two is they're starting to be able to directly impact the company's decisions, right? They have the customer insights, the data, the intelligence to provide recommendations on how best to market, how best to sell, how best to go and get to market in the most meaningful way.
Right. No, I mean, it's all very, there's a lot of, there are the shoulders of others we can stand on a little bit as we think about it, and we have to, we have to take those opportunities to go through there. So actually, I think, we'll get to maybe the last question here, unless, some of the comments, but I think it's interesting when it came, in from Max a little bit about how do we start, especially as we think about sort of the moment marketing. And Jesse, I'll sort of throw this back to you to sort of, as everyone sort of listened to this, there's investments in technology, there's investments in their marketing organization, there's investments in, process and all those things. But, when you think about it, when you think about with organizations that approach you, say, listen, I think this is meaningful. Where do you talk to them about starting? And how do they start, in its simplest form? And I realize that probably could have been a whole other panel by itself in that question, but, just something to sort of wrap up and sort of give them a little bit of a taste of how to think about taking what we talked about today and sort of bringing it home to them, to their organization.
Well, you start by going and sticking your head in the sand. That's how I feel often when I get those big questions. But I kid. Where do you start? Well, I always have to return to the frameworks, right? And when so if someone were to come ask me that, I would start with the key framework of the model for modern marketing. And again, sorry to say it again, but customer understanding, brand strategy, brand experience, developing your Martech ecosystem against that with the data fabric underlying. And then I would point them to the Martech reference model, which for us, we think about how you map to that model. So for example, in the customer understanding layer, there are categories of technology in there that align with customer analytics, right? It might be technologies that are that fulfill descriptive analytics, predictive analytics, digital intelligence, AI, content intelligence, experience optimization. All of those types of categories of technologies we would slot into customer analytics. And then under customer data management, you might see, old school DMPs that I know are dying, and then the newer CDPs on the market in the last 5-10 years. And then you have the technologies that provide, or build customer profiles, or do customer journey mapping, or do cross-channel identity resolution, or customer preference management technology. So there are just a lot of functionalities that exist within just the customer understanding pillar that I talked about earlier, including customer analytics and customer data management. And then as you move down through each pillar in brand strategy, you have in the marketing performance management, you have, all of the analytics companies that are sending the paid data, the owned data, the intelligence like social listening, social intelligence as all part of performance. So within each of those pillars, we kind of think about the general buckets or functionalities of technologies that exist in the marketplace that make up the 9,900 that Brian talked about, Martech and AdTech. But we try to bucket them into categories. So when we work with clients who ask us, well, how do we think about the ecosystem? We would start with the model for modern marketing. And then we would put in front of them the reference model that shows these sort of broad categories within each of the pillars.
Yeah. No,
it's hard to visualize without it's hard to explain without the visual, but hopefully that.
No, I think it's good. I mean, because partly, I've always thought of a lot of my, everyone hears me talk about it, I always think about it on sort of a Y and X axis. There's maturity of sort of the marketing strategy, right? You think about people becoming more mature and getting more into those moments-based marketing. And then there's maturity of sort of the execution capability of this sort of technology. And it's an interesting thing with the frameworks and sort of a reference architecture, the ability the goal, the magic is when you can balance the investments, right, against these two things, which is I'm not too innovative in my strategy that I can't execute, so I have unrealized value. I've spent too much time sort of building out technology, and I don't even have a solid strategy to sort of implement. So I've sort of this, no return on investment that's in there, and being able to have reference models to allow you to balance those sort of strategic investments over time sort of become the critical thing to it. And really, I agree. The big thing is I think everyone just needs to take a step back and be intellectually honest on where they are as an organization and sort of look at it and think about it and build a wider sort of community to sort of drive that IT and marketing together, sort of going out there to look at it. But also remember every decision you make to select a piece of technology needs to have an active decision on how that technology integrates, and it has to have as much work as you think about those things. So
I think that's well said. And the one thing in my experience, I'd like to hear Brian's opinion on this too, is, many times it's daunting when you think about all that there is and it's out there. So like what we say to our partners, like large marketers, is just like, bring me your pain, give me a problem to solve.
Yep.
Right. And like they start talking and we're like, okay, this is how we can fix that. And here are a couple of different options. And this is how it plays into a larger issue that you're having. Because many times those individual pain points in aggregate speak to your larger philosophy of how you're playing in ad tech and Martech. And if we just get them to admit what keeps them up at night and we start to address it, they get talking and we start talking about different solutions and what we might do together. And it goes from very granular to that wider vision that seems so daunting. And then maybe the way that we've told that narrative, it's not as daunting as they had thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
To your point, like we love to hear a customer challenge, and that's like the Amazon philosophy, right? Working backwards from a customer's challenge to create those solutions. We get excited at the variety of use cases that we interface on a day-to-day basis. That's what really gets us excited to come into the office or wherever you are working these days in Idaho. But that's what gets us excited. That's what spawns innovation. And Matt, you said something though that resonated specifically for at least myself on the marketplace side, is when customers are coming to us with the challenge of build versus buy. By the time that they build a solution 12 to 18 months later, somewhat antiquated at that point, because There's already a solution that they could have bought off the shelf to help them accelerate their speed to market in other capacities. So that's where I think for the cloud marketplaces, that's where it's really an angle for us to look at that buyer journey instead of just pure builders.
Yeah, no, that's great. We're definitely at time in here. So I appreciate, one, I appreciate everyone for attending, in this, and two, I appreciate you all from the panel being here, Jesse and Brian and David. It was a great conversation, really talking about, not only moments-based marketing, the work that you've really been doing there, Jesse, going out there, but how do we think, Brian, David, and myself really think about the technology to really enable those type of capabilities out there. So thank you very much for everyone's time today.